They forgot my birthday, and for a moment I thought maybe I was the one who had forgotten it. You see, when you live more than 60 years on this earth, the days start blending together. Seasons turn into one another like pages of a book that someone else is flipping too quickly. But this one day, this one date, had always been sacred to me, not because I loved attention or gifts. God knows I've had too little of either in my life, but because it was the one reminder that I existed, that I was born, that I had survived everything since. This year, nothing. Not a call, not a message, not even a mistake of a greeting that came a day late. Nothing. I sat at the kitchen table, the wood scarred with decades of use, a chipped mug of cold coffee in front of me, and I realized my own children, the people I had carried in my belly, had forgotten me. My grandchildren, who I had once rocked to sleep, who cried into my chest when their parents fought, hadn't remembered either. And the man who was still legally my husband, though I often wondered how he still wore that title, he hadn't looked at me in months, let alone wished me a happy birthday. I tell you this not because I want your pity. I tell you because that silence, that absence, forced me to remember who I was before all of them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning of what you might call my forgetting, because life doesn't strip you bare all at once. No, it takes you piece by piece, day by day, until you stand in a cold kitchen at 64 years old and realize you are invisible in the home you built. When I was a girl, I believed I would be somebody. My father used to tell me that my stubbornness would either save me or ruin me. I had dreams of painting, of teaching, of traveling beyond the little town where I was born. But you know how it goes. A young man comes along, promises you the world, and before you even know what you've given up, you're a wife, then a mother, then a woman who has traded her name, her time, her body for survival. My husband, Peter. Peter. He wasn't always cruel, at least not in the way people imagine cruelty. He didn't raise his hand to me often, though the times he did still echo in my bones. No, his cruelty was quieter. It was in the way he made me doubt myself, in the way he told me that no one else would ever want me, in the way he made me feel that if I left, I'd be nothing. And I believed him. For decades, I believed him. I raised 3 children in that shadow. I cooked meals on money that was never enough. I wore clothes until they fell apart. And I listened to my children cry when their father's rage spilled into their rooms. I thought I was protecting them. I thought that by enduring, I was saving them. But children don't always remember the sacrifices. Sometimes they only remember the silence. And so, when my birthday came this year, and the phone didn't ring, I realized they had learned from him. They had learned how to make me small, how to let me fade. The pain of it sat in my chest like a stone. At first, I wanted to cry, to scream, to beg someone, anyone, to notice me. But then something shifted, something I hadn't felt in years. I laughed. Yes, I sat there in my empty kitchen and laughed, because for the first time in so long, I understood the truth. They had forgotten me, but I had been forgetting myself for years. And that day, the day of my birthday that nobody remembered, became the first day I remembered who I was. Not the wife who bowed her head, not the mother who accepted crumbs of love, not the woman who lived quietly in the shadows of others. No. That day, I was the girl who once dreamed, the stubborn one, the one my father said would either be saved or ruined by her fire. And I promise you this, when I remembered myself, when I chose to stand up again, the world around me began to shake. Because the woman they forgot, she was about to make sure no one would ever forget her again. When I tell you I laughed that day, don't mistake it for joy. It wasn't joy. It was the kind of laugh that comes when pain and clarity collide, when you suddenly see your life from the outside and realize how ridiculous it has all been. I laughed until tears came to my eyes, and then I sat very still, like I was afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had come over me. My kitchen, small and old, felt different in that moment. The wallpaper was peeling, the window over the sink had a crack running across the glass like a scar, and the floorboards creaked under every step. But it wasn't the kitchen that had changed. It was me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about what anyone else wanted. I wasn't waiting for Peter to come stomping in, demanding to know where his dinner was. I wasn't staring at the phone, praying that one of my children would remember I was alive. I was thinking about me. And when you've spent your whole life being everything to everyone else, thinking about yourself feels dangerous. But I couldn't stop. I thought about the first birthday Peter and I shared as husband and wife. I was 21, still glowing from the fantasy that I had chosen the right man. He brought me a necklace, cheap but shiny, and he said, "Don't lose it, because I won't buy you another." I should have heard the warning in his voice then, should have recognized that his gift came with a chain. But I smiled, I kissed him, and I wore that necklace until it turned my skin green. The second year, there was no gift, just a reminder that money was tight, that I should be grateful he was working at all, that I was lucky he came home every night instead of drinking it away at the bar. By the third year, my birthdays stopped belonging to me. They became his days to remind me how much I cost him, how much of a burden I was. The children, when they came along, brought me hope. For a while, when they were small, they would make me little cards with crayons or pick flowers from the yard and bring them in with proud, sticky hands. But as they grew older, they learned. They learned his silence. They learned his indifference. They learned that showing me love meant paying a price they weren't willing to pay. So here I was, 64 years old, and the sum of all that learning was silence, forgotten, invisible, and yet there was a strange kind of freedom in that. Do you know what it feels like to realize no one expects anything from you anymore? No dinners, no apologies, no bending yourself into smaller and smaller shapes so other people can feel bigger. Nothing. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified, but also alive. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I poured myself a glass of wine, the cheap kind, from a bottle that had been gathering dust in the cabinet because Peter hated when I drank, said it made me uppity. But I poured it anyway, and I sat at the table, and I let the bitterness burn my throat. I looked at the calendar on the wall, one of those free ones from the grocery store with pictures of barns and sunflowers, and I realized something else. I had spent my whole life marking time by other people's needs, doctor appointments for the children, paydays and overdue bills, the days Peter would be in a good mood and the days he wouldn't. But not once had I marked time for me. And that night, as I sipped my wine, I made a decision. I was going to remember myself, not just in words, in action. But before I could move forward, I knew I had to face the truth of where I had come from, because you cannot claim your life back until you've looked at every scar, every wound, every moment when you handed your power away. And so the memories came flooding back, some I hadn't touched in decades, like the night Peter came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. I had 3 children asleep upstairs, a roast drying out in the oven, and I asked him gently where he had been. His answer was a backhand across my face so hard I saw stars. I remember sitting on the floor, my cheek burning, my lip bleeding, and thinking, not I should leave him, but I shouldn't have asked. That's what he taught me, to doubt myself, to swallow questions, to shrink. Or the day my eldest, Michael, told me he hated me. He was 14, full of rage, and I had tried to protect him from his father's anger by telling him to stay quiet, to stay out of sight. And Michael screamed, "You're weak, Mom. You let him do this. You're just as bad as he is." And maybe he was right. Maybe my silence made me guilty too. But here's the part no one tells you. When you're a woman like me, trapped with no money, no family to run to, no one who believes you, you survive however you can. And sometimes survival looks like weakness. Sometimes it looks like silence. But inside, deep inside, something still burns. That night on my birthday, alone with my wine, I felt the flame again, and I made myself a promise. I would no longer be the woman who waited for others to remember me. I would remember myself so loudly, so fiercely, that they would have no choice but to see me. And I will confess something to you now, though it shames me to admit it. In that moment, my thoughts weren't only of freedom. They were of revenge, because Peter had taken nearly everything from me, my youth, my confidence, my years of joy, and my children, whether by his teaching or by their own choice, had learned to treat me as though I were nothing. And I thought, if they want to forget me, then I will remind them. Not with words, not with pleas, but with something they would never expect. I didn't know how yet. I only knew that the woman they had buried alive was waking up, and when she rose, she would not be gentle. The promise I made to myself that night, on the day everyone forgot me, sat in my chest like a secret ember. It burned quietly, but steady, and the more I thought about my life, the more the ember caught, until it threatened to become something far greater. You don't get to 64 years old without carrying ghosts. Mine live in every corner of this house. They whisper in the walls. They sit at the foot of the bed at night. They aren't spirits of the dead. No, worse. They're the memories of what I allowed to happen. I remember one evening, years ago, when my youngest, Emily, was just 7. Peter had been drinking, the way he did when work was slow. He came home late, slammed the door so hard the glass rattled, and threw his boots against the wall. Emily woke up, frightened, and came down the stairs in her little nightgown, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She asked him timidly, "Daddy, are you mad?" And he turned on her. He didn't hit her, God forbid. He knew better than that. But his voice, sharp and venomous, cut through her little body like a knife. "Go back to bed before I give you something to cry about." She looked at me, pleading. And do you know what I did? I scooped her up, carried her upstairs, and told her it was fine, that Daddy was just tired, that she should be quiet. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and sat beside her bed until she fell asleep. But what I really did was teach her to accept it, to accept cruelty, to excuse anger, to make herself smaller so someone else could be bigger. And I hate myself for that. I hate that I raised a daughter who now, as a grown woman, barely calls me, barely visits. Maybe it hurts her too much to see me. Or maybe she's angry, the way Michael was angry, that I didn't fight harder. I tell myself I did the best I could, but the truth is, the best I could was never enough. Not for them, not for me. And then there was Michael, my eldest. When he was 16, he started disappearing at night. He'd sneak out, come home with bruises on his knuckles, smelling of smoke. I tried to talk to him, but he would look at me with such coldness, eyes so much like his father's, that I felt small, even in my own kitchen. One night, when I asked him where he had been, he spit out the words that have never left me. "You're pathetic. You let him control everything. You let him treat us like trash. You're no mother. You're his slave." And then he slammed the door in my face. Do you know how it feels to be accused by your own child of the very crime you've been committing against yourself for years? It was as if he had held up a mirror, and I saw not a woman, not a mother, but a shell. I didn't fight him. I didn't scream. I just stood there in the hallway, shaking, until Peter came home, drunk and oblivious, and laughed at me for crying. That was the pattern of my life. Endure, survive, wait for morning. But on the night of my forgotten birthday, with that bitter wine in my veins, I started asking myself, what was I waiting for? Morning had come for more than 40 years, and still nothing changed. I had waited for Peter to become gentle. He never did. I had waited for my children to understand the sacrifices I made. They never did. I had waited for life to reward me for patience. It never did. And suddenly, I thought, maybe life doesn't reward patience. Maybe it only rewards those who take what they are owed. I'll tell you something I've never told anyone. Years ago, when the children were still young, I tried to leave just once. I packed a small bag with their clothes, hid some money in the lining, and waited until Peter went out drinking. I told the kids we were going on a little adventure. We made it as far as the bus station. I remember standing there, clutching 3 small hands, looking up at the schedule on the wall, and feeling the weight of every possible future pressing down on me. Where would we go? Who would take us in? I had no degree, no money, no family left who cared. The bus driver was staring, impatient. Michael was asking questions. Emily started to cry. And I lost my nerve. We went back before Peter returned. He never knew. And I never tried again. That was the night I buried the part of myself that wanted freedom, and I thought she was gone forever. But on my birthday, when no one called, when no one cared, that part of me clawed its way back to the surface. She was furious. She was alive. And she whispered something to me that chilled my blood. They don't deserve your silence anymore. They deserve to know what it feels like to be forgotten, to be powerless, to be nothing. It was the first time in my life that the thought of revenge felt heavier than the thought of escape. I didn't yet know what shape it would take, but I knew one thing with certainty. If my husband, if my children, if all of them had written me off as invisible, I would become unforgettable, not through kindness, not through sacrifice, but through something sharp, something that would cut as deep into them as their forgetting had cut into me. And I smiled when I thought it, because for once, the ghosts in this house didn't feel like they were haunting me. No, for the first time, I felt like they were standing behind me, urging me on. The ghosts kept me company that night. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen until the clock on the wall ticked its way past midnight, past 1, past 2. The house was silent, except for Peter's heavy snoring from the bedroom down the hall. I used to envy that sleep of his, how easily he could rest after tearing me down, how his conscience seemed empty, light as air, while mine was heavy with everything unsaid. But not that night. No, that night I didn't envy him. I watched him through the crack of the bedroom door, sprawled across the bed we had shared for decades, and for the first time, I felt nothing for him. Not fear, not sadness, not even love twisted into something bitter, just nothing. And that kind of nothing, it's dangerous. Because once you stop caring whether someone lives or dies, whether they rise or fall, you are free. But before I could decide what to do with that freedom, the past demanded one more memory. A memory I had buried so deep, I sometimes wondered if I had imagined it. It was my 40th birthday. The children were teenagers then, each already pulling away into their own worlds. I had spent the whole day cooking, though no one had asked me to. I thought, maybe if I made it special, if I filled the table with food, someone would remember. Maybe Peter would say, "Happy birthday." Maybe Michael or Emily would thank me. We sat down to eat. Peter shoveled food into his mouth without a word. Michael stared at his plate. Emily excused herself halfway through the meal to go to a friend's house. Not one word, not one acknowledgement that the day mattered. I swallowed the hurt like I always did, and when the dishes were done, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. "Do you know what I did?" I sang quietly to myself. "Happy birthday to me." The words cracked in my throat, and I cried so hard my knees buckled, and I had to hold the sink to stay upright. I promised myself then, that I would never let them forget again. But, of course, I broke that promise, just like I broke so many promises to myself. And now, here I was, 24 years later, 64 years old, and it had happened again, only this time. The pain didn't crush me, it carved me open, and when you're carved open you can either bleed out or you can fill yourself with something new. That night I chose the latter. I went to the closet in the hallway. It was cluttered with coats, shoes, boxes of things nobody wanted. At the very back, shoved into a corner, was a tin box I hadn't opened in years. Inside was every scrap of money I had ever managed to hide from Peter. Small bills, coins, a few crumpled 20s. It wasn't much, maybe a few $100s in total, but it was mine, untouched, a secret. I pulled it out and set it on the table. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something else. Anticipation. You see, money is power, even in small amounts. And this was the first time in decades I had looked at something and thought, this belongs to me. Not to him, not to the children, me. I counted it twice, then slid the tin back into the closet. But the act itself, touching that hidden stash, feeling its weight, was a declaration. I was done waiting. The next day, I started watching Peter more closely. How he spent his money, where he left his wallet, how often he checked the mail. These were little things I had ignored for years, but now every detail felt important. Information is a weapon if you know how to use it. And I was learning again. But it wasn't just Peter I was watching. I started paying attention to my children too. Emily had posted a photo on social media. Yes, I know how to check these things even at my age. Of a birthday party she had thrown for her best friend. Balloons, cake, laughter. She had remembered her friend's birthday, but not her mother's. Michael, too, posted often. Pictures of his new car, his nights out, his smiling children, my grandchildren. Children who hadn't been brought to visit me in more than a year. I stared at those photos, the way a starving woman stares at a feast. Not because I wanted their lives, but because I wanted them to feel, just once, what it was to be shut out, to be forgotten, to be small. And I knew then my revenge wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be a single blow. No, it would be slow, careful, the way a sculptor chips away at stone until a new shape emerges. Peter first, then the children, one by one. I wasn't going to scream or beg or throw myself at their feet. I had tried all of that. It hadn't worked. No, I was going to teach them. The way they had taught me, with silence, with absence, with a withdrawal so deep that they would one day look around and realize the foundation they had always taken for granted, me, was gone. But unlike me, they wouldn't survive it, because I had endured a lifetime of being forgotten. They had not. That was my advantage. And as I lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself words I had never dared to say out loud. They will remember me, even if it kills them to do it. Once you make a promise to yourself, it changes everything. The air feels different. The ground under your feet feels less like stone and more like clay, ready to be reshaped. That's how I felt in the days after my forgotten birthday, like a woman who had just woken up in her own life, realizing she had hands, strength, will. Peter didn't notice. He never noticed me unless I was in his way. He went about his routines, work, beer, television, grumbling about bills, complaining about politics, muttering about the children, never calling. He didn't see the difference in me because he had never truly looked at me in the first place. That was his mistake, and so I began small, very small. I stopped cooking for him. Not all at once. No, that would have drawn too much attention. Instead, I made meals only for myself. When he asked, "Where's dinner?" I would shrug and say, "There's bread, there's cheese." The first time, he laughed, thinking it was a joke. By the third time, he slammed a fist on the table. But I didn't flinch, not anymore. Then I stopped washing his clothes. Again, not all at once. I just forgot. A shirt here, a pair of pants there. He began wearing things twice, 3 times, grumbling that the laundry was piling up. And still, I shrugged. It was amazing, the power of neglect. I had spent a lifetime serving, filling in the gaps, smoothing over the rough edges of everyone else's life. By pulling back, even slightly, I made him stumble, and oh, how satisfying it was to watch. But I didn't stop with him. I started pulling back from my children, too. When Emily finally called 2 weeks after my birthday, as though nothing had happened, I let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. She left a short message, her voice light, casual. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Hope you're good." I didn't return the call. When Michael sent me a photo of his son's soccer game, I didn't reply with my usual words of praise. I didn't reply at all. And let me tell you, silence is not emptiness. Silence is a presence. It grows, it gnaws, it makes people uneasy. I wanted them to feel that unease, but silence alone wasn't enough, not for Peter. He was too used to me being quiet. He mistook it for weakness, so I decided to go further. Remember that tin box I found in the closet? My secret savings? Well, I began to add to it, quietly. When Peter left his wallet on the counter, I would slip a bill here, a bill there, nothing big, nothing noticeable. Just enough to feed the box. Just enough to give me options. At first, I felt guilty. Old habits die hard. My fingers trembled as I took a $10 bill, as though some invisible force might slap my hand. But after the first time, it became easier. By the 5th time, I felt nothing but power. I told myself it was mine anyway. All of it. Every dollar he ever earned was bought with the years of my labor, my body, my silence. I wasn't stealing, I was reclaiming. And I wasn't just reclaiming money, I was reclaiming myself. I began to move differently around the house. Straighter, slower, not rushing to answer, not shrinking when he barked. I began to look at him in a way I hadn't in years, openly, directly. It unsettled him. He would catch my eyes on him and snap, "What are you staring at?" And I would smile, just smile. That smile made him more nervous than any words could have. The truth is, men like Peter don't fear anger. They thrive on it. They know how to fight it. What they fear is indifference. What they fear is a woman who no longer plays her part. But I didn't stop at Peter. No, I started to think bigger, wider. I thought about Emily, about how she leaned on me in the past, for babysitting, for money, for advice, and I realized I had always been her safety net, the quiet one who said yes, even when it cost me. So the next time she called, asking if I could help her with something, picking up her daughter from school, I said no, simply, calmly, "No, I can't." The silence on the other end of the phone was delicious. "Mom," she said, surprised, "you always—" "Not anymore," I interrupted, and I hung up. Then there was Michael, my angry boy who had grown into an angry man. He had always come to me when he needed to vent about his father, about his job, about his life, and I had always listened, even when his words cut me, even when he made me the scapegoat. But when he called one evening, voice tight with frustration, I let him talk for 5 minutes before I said, "Michael, I don't have time for this." And I ended the call. I imagine he sat there, staring at the phone, stunned. Because, for once, his mother wasn't his punching bag. Piece by piece, I was dismantling the role they had forced on me. Wife, servant, listener, ghost. I was no longer any of those things. I was something else. Something they didn't recognize. Something They would come to fear. And here's the most important part. They noticed, not all at once, but slowly, like a draft creeping under a door. Peter began asking, "What's wrong with you?" Emily texted more often, little check-ins that sounded less casual, more anxious. Michael even came by the house unannounced, claiming he was in the neighborhood. I said little, I did little, I let the silence work. And when I looked at their faces, confused, unsettled, desperate to understand what had changed, I realized this was just the beginning, because they had forgotten me. But I had remembered who I was, and I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The strangest thing about change is how quietly it begins. One day you are still invisible, still the woman in the corner of the room, and the next, you are the air they can't seem to breathe without noticing. Peter noticed first. Of course he did. He was the one most accustomed to my obedience, to my silence. His entire life had been built on the comfort of me bending, folding, making myself small. When I stopped doing that, he floundered. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he asked one night when I served myself a plate of food and nothing for him. I looked him in the eye and said calmly, "Someone you don't know anymore." The look on his face, confusion, anger, and the faintest flicker of fear was more satisfying than any gift I had ever received. And I decided then, if they would not remember me with love, they would remember me with unease, with dread, with awe. So I moved carefully. Peter liked to keep control of the money. He had always handled the bills, the accounts, everything. He told me once, years ago, "You'd never survive without me. You wouldn't know where to start." At the time, I believed him. But in recent weeks, I had started watching him closer, watching where he put the checkbook, watching the little notebook he scribbled numbers in. It didn't take long before I found the weak spots, the utilities he paid late, the hidden envelope of cash he thought I didn't know about, the receipts from bars, from places he swore he never went. So one morning while he showered, I made a few phone calls. Quiet ones. I spoke to the bank, pretending to ask innocent questions about balances and accounts. I learned enough to know exactly how fragile his little kingdom was. He wasn't as powerful as he pretended. In fact, he was drowning. The bills were higher than the money. The debts were piling. That was my first discovery. The second came when I opened the mail one afternoon before he got home. A letter addressed to him, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a notice, late payment on a loan I hadn't known about. He had borrowed money, probably to cover his drinking, maybe more, and he hadn't told a soul. I smiled. Oh, how I smiled, because information like that is a weapon, and I had just placed it in my arsenal. But I wasn't going to use it right away. No. Revenge, real revenge, is slow, precise, like drops of water carving through stone. So I waited. I began moving money from his wallet to my tin box more frequently. Just a few bills here and there, never enough to draw his attention. I added my own little trick. I rearranged the bills so he'd think he had simply miscounted. He grumbled, cursed under his breath, blamed the bar or the cashier. He never blamed me, and all the while my little stash grew. But revenge is not only about money, it's about the mind. So I started working on Emily and Michael too. When Emily called again, this time with a tone of real frustration, "Mom, why aren't you answering me? You scared me last week." I responded with only one sentence. "Now you know how it feels." Then I hung up. Do you know the pleasure of turning their own lessons back on them, to make them taste the bitter silence they had fed me for years? It was intoxicating. Michael came next. He came to visit again, pushing open my front door like he owned the place. "Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strange." Strange. That's what he called it. Strange. I looked at him and said, "You remember when you were 16, when you called me pathetic, when you said I was no mother at all?" His face drained of color. He stammered, I was a kid. I didn't mean..." But I cut him off. I never forgot. And now, neither will you. And I walked away, leaving him standing there in the living room, guilty and silent for once. Ah, silence, my oldest friend, my deadliest weapon. But the sweetest moment came with Peter. One evening, he sat at the table, grumbling about the bills again. "I swear this house is bleeding me dry," he muttered, scratching numbers on a scrap of paper. I leaned over so close he could feel my breath and said, "Maybe you should be more careful. People forget things, numbers, payments, even birthdays, and forgetting can cost you." He froze. His hands stopped moving. His eyes darted to mine, searching, suspicious. But I only smiled, poured myself a glass of water, and left the room. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't have the upper hand. For the first time, he was afraid of me, and that fear, that flicker in his eyes, was the beginning of my victory. But don't misunderstand me. I didn't want only fear. Fear is temporary. Fear fades. No, I wanted ruin. For Peter. For the children who abandoned me. For every person who thought I was invisible. And the best part, they had no idea it had already begun. Because while they went about their lives, careless, confident, certain I was still the same old woman in the shadows, I was building, planning, watching, and when the time came to strike, I would not hesitate, because I had waited too long, far, far too long. Do you know what true silence sounds like? Not the kind when you close the door and the world outside disappears. Not the hush of midnight when even the birds are too tired to sing. No, true silence is when you cut every tie, when the voices that once mocked you, demanded from you, drained you, are gone. It's terrifying at first, like stepping into an abyss, but then it becomes intoxicating. After that birthday dinner, the one they held without me, the one where I stood in the shadows and watched them raise their glasses to family, I knew I could never go back. I didn't want to. Something inside me snapped, but not in a way that made me weaker. No, it was like a bone breaking and then healing stronger than before. I withdrew from them completely. I stopped answering their calls, their rare messages. I didn't open the door when they came pounding, pretending to check in. They thought they could dictate my silence, that I'd come crawling back once I felt lonely. But they underestimated me. They always had. In that silence, I began to rebuild. Not the life they wanted for me, but the one I had buried long ago. I dusted off my old notebooks, pages filled with stories I once dreamed of writing, before my husband told me it was childish and my children laughed, asking, "Who would read something you wrote?" I started writing again. At first, it was painful, as if each word had to claw its way out of the cage I had locked them in. But then, like a river breaking through a dam, They poured out. Anger, grief, betrayal, but also hope. My hope. I found strength in small routines. I cooked meals the way I liked them, spiced the way I preferred, without worrying if anyone would complain. I walked at dawn, feeling the chill of the morning air on my skin, remembering that this body was mine. It always had been. I laughed again, sometimes at nothing, sometimes at the absurdity of how I had lived half my life imprisoned by people who were supposed to love me. And then came the letters. My daughter was the first. A carefully written apology, full of excuses. She was busy. She didn't mean to hurt me. I should understand. She begged me to come back for Sunday dinner, as if one meal could erase years of neglect. I read it once and burned it. I didn't need her crumbs of guilt. Then my son reached out. His tone was different, angry, accusing. "You're tearing the family apart," he wrote, as if I hadn't been the one holding it together all along. He said I was selfish, dramatic, selfish. Imagine that. The woman who gave everything, who sacrificed her dreams, her youth, her health, being called selfish for finally taking a piece back. I didn't respond, but my silence only fueled their desperation. They tried harder. Flowers left on my doorstep, calls from unknown numbers, even a letter from my eldest grandson, likely dictated by his parents, full of words too heavy for a child. They wanted me to break, to run back into their arms, into their cage. But I had discovered something they feared most. I no longer needed them. And here is the cruelest, sweetest twist of all. Once they realized I wouldn't come back, they began to fracture. I heard whispers from neighbors, saw glimpses on social media, arguments at family gatherings. My absence had become a presence, louder than I had ever been in their company. They had built their world on my obedience, my silence, my servitude, and without me, it was collapsing. Did I feel guilty? No. For once in my life, I didn't, because for the first time, I understood something profound. I had been more than a mother, more than a wife, more than their scapegoat. I had been me all along, waiting to be remembered, and I remembered her. I had thought the greatest pain was being forgotten on my birthday, but no, the greatest pain had been forgetting myself for decades. And the greatest triumph was this: I had remembered. And once you remember who you are, truly remember, there is no turning back. I often sit on my porch in the evenings now, a cup of tea warming my hands, the night air brushing against my cheeks. The world feels different, lighter, sharper, as if I've peeled away years of suffocation and finally learned how to breathe. It's almost laughable to think it all began with one forgotten birthday, a simple date, unnoticed, that cracked open the truth of who I was and who I would become. After I walked out of that house, I never went back, not once. I sold the property through a lawyer without so much as looking over my shoulder. My children cried foul, accused me of betrayal, of cruelty. But I reminded myself they had betrayed me first, in silence, in neglect, in choosing convenience over loyalty. They wanted the walls, the furniture, the ghosts of their father's wealth. Let them choke on it. I kept my freedom. The town whispered, as towns always do. Some pitied me, painting me as the fragile old woman cast aside by her ungrateful family. Others called me ruthless, heartless even, for cutting ties so cleanly. I let them talk. Their words carried no weight compared to the chains I had shattered. If they wanted to think me cruel, let them. Sometimes, cruelty is nothing more than survival dressed in steel. I built something new in the years that followed. Not wealth, though I learned to manage what I had with a sharpness I never knew was in me. Not luxury, though I allowed myself small indulgences like books stacked high beside my bed and fresh flowers every week, a gift from me to me. No, what I built was a life where my voice mattered, where my days were my own, where no one could erase me, overlook me, or silence me again. I met women like me, too, at the community center, at quiet gatherings in a neighbor's garden, even in the library where I spent long afternoons. Women who had been discarded, overlooked, used up, and left behind. We shared our stories like smuggled treasures, finding strength in the cracks and scars we carried. Together, we learned we were not broken, we were sharpened, and sharp women cannot be forgotten. My children still reach out sometimes. A phone call here, a letter there, usually when they need something. An apology never came, not really, though occasionally a hint of regret slips into their words. I listen, I nod, I answer with politeness, but nothing more. They ask when I will visit, when I will come back, when I will forgive. I smile to myself. They still don't understand. I didn't leave to punish them. I left to save myself. Forgiveness is irrelevant. I am no longer waiting at their table, holding my breath for scraps of affection. I am feasting at my own. There is a peculiar kind of vengeance in living well after being discarded. Not loud, not dramatic, not the kind that makes headlines. It is quiet, deliberate, undeniable. Every morning I wake with peace in my chest. I win. Every time I laugh without fear of ridicule, I win. Every year that passes where my birthday is celebrated by me with candles I light for myself, I win. They thought they could erase me by forgetting. Instead, they gave me the chance to remember who I was. And who am I? I am Eleanor, a woman who endured violence, betrayal, and silence. A woman who survived the hunger of poverty and the poison of neglect. A woman who rose from the ruins of a forgotten birthday and built an empire of self-respect. I am my own witness, my own savior, my own avenger. And for the first time in my life, I am enough. So when the next birthday comes, I will pour a glass of wine, cut a slice of cake, and sit beneath the stars. I will close my eyes and make a wish, not for someone else to love me, not for the past to be rewritten, but for the courage to keep choosing myself. And I know, deep in my bones, that wish will always come true, because they forgot my birthday. But I remembered who I was,